New York Giants co-owner John Mara spoke to reporters at the NFL meetings. What did he have to say, and what can we take away from what he had to say? I'm going to cover that plus a whole lot more on today's Locked On Giants podcast, coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, P-Train, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network, part of the SI.com family. And a big welcome on in to my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, my newcomers, and everybody in between. You are all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And if you don't make us your first listen or watch, thanks all the same for spending some time with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And please, if you do watch us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and don't forget to hit that little notification bell so that you get notified every time I post a new video, whether it be a full video or a clip. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, John Mara, co-owner of the New York Giants, broke what is basically a year-long silence on the state of the team. You know, what are the expectations going forward? What were his thoughts on some of the things that happened in the recent weeks? So I have some takeaways on that, what he had to say, as well as my own takeaways and interpretations of what he had to say as to what that could potentially mean for the team going forward. Then in segment 2, we're going to talk about the draft and the sneaky needs this team has. The draft is about a month away. Actually, as I record this, it's 31 days away. So you could say it's a month away. And the Giants have some sneaky needs that they need to address. We'll talk about those. And then finally, in segment 3, there are some questions that, still need to be answered. And again, just based off of things that the Giants have said, things that just don't make sense to me. So we're going to explore those as well and just kind of try and talk them all through. So that is our agenda on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Let's jump in. As usual, we've got a lot to talk about. All right. John Mara spoke to reporters down at the league meeting, the annual league meeting, in which this year is being held in Orlando, Florida. Wish I was down there because it's cold up here in the Northeast, but I'm here still working away. And there were a few things that he had to say that I think kind of jumped out at me. The first thing is, he spoke about still having confidence in Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. All right, not a surprise there, folks. I've been telling you all along because I know there are some people who think that if Daboll has another bad year this year, that he is going to maybe not be given another year. And same with Schoen if they don't turn things around. Folks, I've been telling you now for the longest time, those two guys, I mean, unless they do something really, really horrible, they are going to get another year. Think about it for a minute, if you will. This is year 3 for Daboll and for Schoen. Dave Gettleman got, 4 years? All right. So Shane's not going anywhere, regardless of what happens this year. Daboll, again, he would have to completely lose the locker room. And if you look at the end of last year, folks, the Giants went 4-3 in their final 7 games. And I know that's not much of a consolation. And you're probably saying, oh, so what? They still finished with a 6-11 record and they didn't win, didn't make it to the playoffs. But that counts for something. So, I do think that they're going to be safe, both of them. And I know I said on yesterday's program, for those of you who are my everydayers, I said that even if they take a quarterback that doesn't guarantee anything, that doesn't necessarily guarantee another year of Daboll working with that quarterback, but I'll say it again, he would have to do something really horrible to not be back next year. So still confidence on the behalf of Mara in Schoen and Daboll. All right. This thing I found kind of interesting. He was asked about Daniel Jones, and he spoke about how Jones is making progress in his rehab and how he's now running on land, whatever that means. I have my theories about it, but unless I see it, I can't really comment on it. But anyway, he was asked about the possibility of drafting a quarterback. And basically, John Mara is going to leave that up to Joe Shane and Brian Dable to decide. But John was also of the opinion that, hey, go ahead, bring in another quarterback. Let him compete with Daniel Jones. I thought that was kind of interesting. And here's why I thought it was interesting, because you have heard from Joe Shane and to a degree Brian Dable when he was on with Tom Pelissero back on Saturday, that Daniel Jones is going to be the guy once healthy. At least that's the expectation. And I keep pointing out to you folks the word expectation when used to describe what the plan is at quarterback. They expect it to be the case, but you know what? I have said all along that the coaching staff, unless you are a top 5 at your position, you're going to have to compete. Now, right now, is Daniel Jones the best option on the team at quarterback? Yes. They had a quarterback in the draft, even if it's first round. Is he still the best option? Yes. Based on experience, right? That doesn't mean, though, that Daniel Jones is the long-term answer. It simply means that you play your best guy. And I know that to some of you, that's like saying, well, pick your poison because, if Daniel Jones is the best they've got, then they're in trouble. But the fact of the matter is Jones is the most experienced in that offense. And Jones, once healthy, is going to be the choice. Now, for what it's worth, they also said, John Mara also said that Jones should be ready for training camp and the regular season. I'm going to have a thought about that a little later on in the program when I get to segment 3. But that was another point that John brought up. John spoke about Saquon Barkley leaving and how he hated to see it happen. So here's the thing, as I understand it, Saquon never got an offer this cycle from the Giants. It was believed that they had a number in mind for him, and that number was not a 10 million plus, which is what he got from the Eagles. All right. So he wasn't going to get 10 million plus APY from the Giants. Just wasn't going to happen. If Barkley was going to get an offer, maybe in the range that the Giants were looking to sign him to, I think perhaps he would have come back to the Giants and said, hey, I got this offer. What can you do? But because the Eagles blew the Giants out of the water, this, Barkley coming back really never had a chance. And John Mara spoke about how it hurt him to lose Barkley, and especially to the Eagles. And he also said, well, we did offer him the 2 contracts last year, and, that didn't work out. I believe that in the long run, that is going to work out to be a blessing in disguise for the Giants. Because think about it. Had Barkley signed one of those contracts offers that he got last year from the team, his cap number would have gone up this year, and they probably would have had to restructure it. And the last thing you want to have to do if you're Joe Shane is to keep restructuring deals, especially on guys who are not going to be with you for the long term. Okay. So restructuring Dexter Lawrence, that's one thing. Restructuring Andrew Thomas, that's one thing. Those guys are going to be with you for a number of years. Barkley, on the other hand, if you had re-signed him and then you had to restructure him this year, probably not what you want to do, because like the likelihood of him not being with you for a number of years is a little higher. So that's what John had to say about Barkley. He also talked about the offensive line and how it's been a disappointment. Well, we all know that. And I found it interesting. It was said, I think it was by Shane, who also spoke to reporters today, but someone mentioned that the plan is still to roll with Evan Neal at right tackle. So that would mean John Runyon and Jermaine Illuminar are going to be your guards. Again, I'm going to have a comment on that in the third segment of this podcast, because I don't believe it. And I'll tell you why I don't believe it in a little later on in the program. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what John Mara had to say, the key takeaways. The most interesting one I thought was let a quarterback come in and compete with Daniel Jones. Because that to me, folks, doesn't sound like a full vote of confidence. I mean, would he have said that about Eli Manning in his prime? Probably not. So that to me was a very telling remark by John Mara. So, all right, coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast, the draft is a month away. What are the sneaky needs and why? I'm going to tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, if you're having trouble finding those last minute tickets to your favorite concerts, shows, and sporting events, Game Time has you covered. They offer a wide selection of seats complete with seat views to help you decide where you want to sit, and they're constantly offering last minute tickets through flash deals. There are no hidden fees. You're going to know exactly what your deal is before you check out. And Game Time even has tickets available as late as an hour after an event starts, making it truly the best place to find last minute deals at amazing prices. Want more reasons to trust Game Time? They offer event cancellation protection. And if you find your tickets in the same section and row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm scheduled to have Brad Spielberger, Pro Football Focus, on the program. We're going to talk mainly about the value that the Giants got in free agency. So we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as the draft. It's always good to have Brad on the program. He's been on before with me, and I'm looking forward to having him on again. So hope you will join us. And of course, Brian Dable is scheduled to speak to the media on Wednesday. I'm sorry, on Tuesday. So we'll, of course, take a look at what he had to say. And just like I did with Joe Shane, I'll kind of give you my takes on what he had to say, the key points of anything, noteworthy. So that's what's coming up here on Locked On Giants. And again, thank you for tuning in. And for an amazing month, by the way. I mean, we are on our way to record numbers this month, particularly on the YouTube channel. So I can't thank you all enough for tuning in and making this possible. I mean, there was a time when I used to pray that I would get 1,000 views, and you guys are just killing it for me, and I appreciate it. So, all right, let's talk about sneaky needs for the Giants in the draft. Now, let's start with cornerback 2. If you remember correctly, Tre'Davious White, the former Buffalo Bills cornerback, was in for a visit. That visit didn't materialize. I mean, it materialized, but no signing came of it, right? We would have heard something by now. So White, apparently, the impression I get is that he's still shopping around for the best possible deal. And I can only conclude that the Giants probably offered him a prove-it deal since he was coming off the injuries. So, P.S., the Giants still need a cornerback too. Now, this is a deep draft class for cornerbacks, mostly slot guys, but you probably could come up with a CB2, because right now your CB2 is Nick McLeod, who's also your best special teams player. You really don't want to put Nick McLeod on defense if you don't have to, because that means you take him off of special teams. And I really don't think they want to do that. So they've got to come up with a solution for cornerback 2. And I don't know, would a trade maybe materialize somewhere? I don't know. It's certainly a possibility. You can't rule it out. But the Giants definitely need cornerback 2. Okay, safety, I think we can all agree that's a sneaky need, because even though they signed Jalen Mills, it's not for the long term. And they've got some young guys at safety. I still say Dane Belton is going to be the incumbent or to take over for Xavier McKinney. But, does he have the build and the durability to hold up for an increased workload? So that remains to be seen. Inside linebacker is a sneaky need. All right. They've got Micah McFadden, Bobby Okereke as the starters, and behind them, Well, it doesn't look like they're going to re-sign Isaiah Simmons. So who's behind them? They brought back Carter Coughlin. All right. He's more special teams. They've got Darian Beavers who's going to compete. He's he's going on year 2 post surgery from the ACL tear. But is he the long-term answer? I don't know about that. I think they bring in another player, possibly a draft pick or an undrafted free agent to compete. I think they have to be honest with you. That is a sneaky need. Defensive line is a sneaky need. I've been screaming about that. The Giants got to beef up in the trenches, and they've got Dexter Lawrence. Okay, he can rush the passer. Raheem Nunez, Roches, Jordan Riley, DJ Davidson, those 3 really not pass rushers. So do the Giants maybe look to get a defensive lineman who can push the pocket and get after the pass rusher or the passer rather, sort of like how Dexter Lawrence does it? So that's a need. And then the big one, tight end, because even though the Giants went and re-signed Lawrence Cager and added 2 tight ends, Manhurts and Stoll, they still don't know what's going on with Darren Waller. All right. Shane, I think it was Joe Shane, told reporters during the media session on Monday that Waller still has not made up his mind as to whether he's going to retire or not. And they're still giving him space. But you know what, folks? April 15th, this team starts the offseason conditioning program. Waller better decide soon. All right. I don't know how much longer he can drag this out. And I know, people will say, well, it's retiring and there's a lot that goes into it. And I don't want to pretend to get inside his head, but you're either in or you're out. And if you have a feeling like one way, just act on it. So why it's taking this long, I don't know. And then the questions I would have is, how has his training been? Has he been training on the event in case he does plan to return? So those would be concerns that I would have as far as sneaky needs. And one last one I'll give you is running back. The Giants, if they could get a power running back to add to that committee approach that they're going to run, boy, I would be thrilled. I'm old enough to remember the days of Brandon Jacobs and Ahmad Bradshaw. Jacobs, of course, was the big bruiser type who would pound the heck out of you. And then when the defense got tired, Ahmad Bradshaw with his quickness would kind of finish them off. So I'm old enough to remember that. And that was a great, great combination, that big power back versus the smaller, lightning quick guy. I'd love to see the Giants get a guy like that in the draft. Whether or not, they feel it's important, I don't know, because they do have Eric Gray. They have Jashawn Corbin. So they do have guys, that I'm sure they're going to want to take a look at. I don't know necessarily if Eric Gray, though, is that big power back. And I would just love to see the Giants get that. So I think that's a sneaky need for what it's worth. You might disagree, but I definitely think that is a sneaky need for the Giants. All right. Coming up next, ladies and gentlemen, the Giants say certain things, but I've got some questions about some of the things they have said and some of the plans that they have. So I'm going to tell you what all those are right after this. Hey, Giant fans, say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. And in this segment, I've got questions. Okay, now, before I get into them, I know a lot of you say, Pat, you take whatever the Giants say at face value and you don't really question it. That's not true. I report what they say, but I certainly do question some of what they say because some of it just, quite frankly, doesn't make sense from a logical perspective or based on what I know to be true or what I believe to be true. So in this segment, I'm going to talk about a few of those things just to show you guys that, no, I don't take everything they feed to us and run with it. Now, I do believe that plans change, obviously. They might intend to do something today, but that doesn't mean that what they're intending to do today is what they're going to do, 2 months from now. So let's talk about some of these things. And I'm going to start off with Evan Neal at right tackle. Joe Shane, Brian Dable have said Evan Neal is going to get a chance at right tackle. Now, I do believe that to be the case. But I also believe that if he falters, Jermaine Illuminor is going to take over that spot. Now, what would that mean for Evan Neal? I have been screaming now for I don't know how long for the Giants to cross-train Evan Neal at left guard. Put him next to Andrew Thomas, all right? Where was Neal most successful in college? Playing on the left side, all right? So why not put him at left guard next to Andrew Thomas, where he could maybe form a nice 1-2 punch with Thomas on that left side? Now, if he doesn't work out at right tackle, that's how you salvage him. Now, some people will say, well, what about the balance issues and these issues and that? Well, if he still has those issues and he gets moved to the guard and he still has those problems, guess what? Put him on the bench. You just wasted, the 7th overall pick in a draft on a guy who has balance issues that you can't correct. So I firmly believe that even though that Evan Neal is going to get another crack at right tackle, they're going to cross-train him at guard. They have to. And if you've been watching, again, if you're an everydayer, I had Hondo Carpenter on the show a couple weeks back, and he talked about Carmen Brasillo's philosophy when it comes to offensive linemen. Carmen Brasillo, of course, the new Giants offensive line coach. And he said, Hondo said that Carmen believes that unless you are a top 5 at your position, like an Andrew Thomas, you better be prepared to cross-train. All right. So that's what I think is going to happen with Evan Neal. I think that makes the most sense, to be honest with you, because if he flops at right tackle, you try and salvage him at guard. Maybe he works better out of a phone booth. I don't know. But right now, he's got a lot to show. Now, the question is, will Evan Neal be receptive to playing guard? If he's not, guess what? He ain't going to be on this team much longer. So we'll see what kind of approach they take and how this all plays out. But that's something that I want to see play out. Okay, the next thing I want to mention is this statement by John Mara and Joe Shane, who say that, if Daniel Jones is healthy, he's going to be the guy. He's going to be ready for training camp, that he's going to be ready for the start of the season. Now, while I have no reason to doubt that, assuming that Jones doesn't have any setbacks, here's where my concern is with Daniel Jones. And I've got two areas I'm going to talk about here. Number one, if I had a mortgage, I would bet the mortgage that Daniel Jones doesn't play in the preseason games, that they are going to try to build him up through practices. Now, I don't know if the Giants plan to have scrimmages or what, exactly their plans are for this summer. I believe the Giants are not going to play Daniel Jones in the preseason games. Why would they risk him in preseason games where, God forbid, he takes off and could potentially take a hit or something could happen to where now he's undone all the work that he put in previously. So I don't think we see him in the preseason. Now, why do I mention that? Because if you go back to last year, Jones barely played in the preseason. And oh, by the way, we all saw what happened when he did play in the regular season, how he was indecisive and just did not look good. Now, some of you will say, well, it was the offensive line. It was he didn't have Saquon. Guess what, folks? He supposedly has a better offensive line, and he ain't going to have Saquon this year. So I'm sorry, the excuses have dried up. So my concern with Daniel Jones is if he doesn't get preseason action, how ready is he really going to be for week 1? That's a concern that I have. I'm not going to lie. So I'm curious to see how the coaches get him ready, create the atmosphere. Because look, they can do certain things in practice, obviously, but you cannot replicate game speed and game conditions. It just doesn't happen, right? The quarterback is wearing that red jersey, which means don't touch him. So what are you going to do now in a live game when the quarterback doesn't have the red jersey on and you can touch him if you're a defender? So that's a concern of mine. Now, the second concern with Daniel Jones and this whole he's going to be ready. What are they going to do about him as a runner? Now, look, he has a torn ACL, and ACLs do heal. And people have gone on, that have torn ACLs, they have gone on to be runners and move around and whatnot. Okay, great. Daniel Jones, however, tends to be a little on the reckless side when he's a runner. So, the hope is that, okay, the offensive line holds up and maybe he doesn't feel the need to take off as much. But that leads to some other concerns I have. Like, for example, if he doesn't see the entire field, which has been a problem post-snap for him, does he take off regardless? Does he have a better feel for the pocket, and if the pocket is closing around him? So I'm curious to see how often they call for design runs for him. I think they're going to cut that down, quite frankly. But more importantly, are they going to rein him in a little bit and say, hey, Daniel, don't just take off. Try and find something. And if you can't, throw it away. And moreover, can he adapt to that? Because he is hardwired at this point to where if there's nothing there, he's going to try and make a play himself. So these are concerns I have about Daniel Jones and if he is indeed ready for week 1. Being physically ready, physically cleared, fine. And, oh, by the way, coming off the ACL, is he going to be limited in practice, as sometimes we saw with players in the past? For example, last year, remember Wan'Dale Robinson, who spent all year long on the PUP list, when he first started off, he was limited at first in the beginning. So the expectation, though, is that Daniel Jones won't be on the PUP list. He'll be able to practice, but are they going to manage his practice reps? And if so, again, how does that affect his readiness? So those are the concerns I have. Those are the questions I have. Obviously, we need to see how it all plays out. I'll be there. I'll be watching. I'll be reporting back to y'all. And let's hope for the best. And let's, by the way, hope that a quarterback is in this team's future. If you were with the live stream last week, Tana asked me, he says, what percentage do you give the Giants of taking a quarterback? And I said 99.9%. I'm sticking with it, folks. I still think they're going to take a quarterback at some point in the draft. I don't think it'll be, in the first round. I'd still say they go wide receiver in the first round, but I would not be surprised if they go quarterback in the second day of the draft. But we'll see. I'm just guessing and using logic here. Doesn't mean that I'm going to be right. Doesn't mean I'm going to be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll admit to it. If I'm right, I won't gloat. It's not within me. But anyway, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. Or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Or if you're just spending time with us during your day, thank you for that as well. I'll be back tomorrow with an all-new episode of the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope to see you then. Have a good one, Giant fans.